In our last episode here on Flock, we joined David Parks on a camellia tour through Camellia Forest Nursery in North Carolina. And in this episode, we sync up with his wife, Christine Parks, on growing, harvesting, and producing the acclaimed Camellia sinensis plant, which gives us our green, black, white, oolong, and pu-ehr teas.
We have had several tastings, educational workshops here over the last few months. And right now I'm just trying to sort through the last teas that we made last season from September, which it takes black tea time to age, which is something that I hadn't realized.
You have to ferment it, right?
Well, it oxidizes. Okay. It's all a matter of oxidation, whether you go from the leaf and have a green tea or go to all the way to a black tea or an oolong or a white tea.
Pu-ehr, right? Pu-ehr?
Pu-ehr is the only tea that's fermented traditionally.
I see.
And so that's oxidation simply requires the enzymes in the cells and the molecules that are there. And when they're exposed to oxygen, they come together and make the polyphenols that you're expecting in a black tea, for example, this one. Isn't this gorgeous?
It's absolutely gorgeous. And that's where a lot of the health benefits come in, from the polyphenols.
Yeah. And they're there in green tea and they're there in black tea, and you could speak for hours on the health benefits of
one of the
tea,
things that I had learned about recently, because of some of the, with coronavirus and everything, that they were doing molecular docking studies, and I saw that epigallocatechin gallate, ECGC, which is found in Camellia sinensis leaves, was actually one of the organic compounds that actually docked to the ACE2 receptor. And I was like, that's really interesting.
I wonder.
And so I was like, I wonder if that could be like a sinus spray, ECGC.
Oh, that's interesting.
Drinking
okay, that was my
once
time.
a day.
So I am going to
That's her 2-minute mark.
Skip the formalities.
Perfect.
And go straight into your little cups. I saved you the special cups.
Ooh.
They've been loved, so they've got lots of tea stain in them.
I love that.
This is a rather new one. I love to collaborate with local potters and other makers. Sorry about that.
I am a sucker for ceramics myself. So.
Yeah, me too. I was like, if you want to set up a pottery studio downstairs, that would be lovely.
That would be perfect,
In November, we have something called Meet the Makers. There was a pottery educator, an artist, and myself who just happened to be talking, and we were like, well, we really love educating, but we're not really big on selling things, but we need to sell things because we make many things, and that helps support our work. So we started this, and now we have 10 to 15 artists who come in early in November and bring their wares.
That's phenomenal. So they really just sell their product here then.
Right, and so that's why this is so special to me, that we have this upstairs studio. We may name it a community tea studio, whatever you want to call it. It really is a community gathering space where we give our classes and where people get together for all sorts of things tea related and not.
Yeah, is there any recommendation on how you should drink your tea?
Well, I like black tea when it's hot.
Here you go, Sander.
So when you're tasting tea, there's all sorts of other sorts of slurpings and things like that. Oh, that's too hot.
Mine's just right.
Yours is just right. Yeah, I just poured mine. So this is actually made from what we've named the Carolina Emerald. It's finally gotten a name. It used to be called Small Leaf, and it was one of the 2 Camellia sinensis that they began selling way back when the nursery started. What
I noticed about this is that sometimes when you have a black tea, it's very bitter. This one doesn't feel like it puckers my lips at all. It's not as bitter.
So there's a lot of factors that go into making a good black tea.
Yeah.
And some of that actually is the plant, some of it's the season, some of it's how much sunlight it's getting. You'll know that in some green teas, they shade them, right? For matcha, they will shade the teas to make more chlorophyll. and that also reduces the catechins, which you were talking about, one of them earlier. And those catechins are what are come together to make the polyphenols, and there's a lot of other factors that go into it.
So if they want more chlorophyll in their matcha, I'm assuming the greener matcha seems to be the better or the fresher, or?
Right, well, I'm not a super matcha expert, although we're having a wonderful expert coming to talk on Japanese teas on April 6th.
Nice.
But basically, the freshest, best ceremonial matchas are ones where all the matchas are made from shaded tea, to the best of my understanding, at least the ones that people care about for drinking. And then they store them in a refrigerator. And before they grind them, then they grind them right before they're going to send them, because any form of oxidation that happens.
By the way, I've never drank out of a square cup before, and it kind of is a cool experience for your lips.
It's different. It's different. Well, we had our choice. We had many, many choices here, but.
So what is all this? You have some rose? You
well,
have the buds of.
This was for another class we did on tea and the theme of roses. So we have some bushes called rosea. They make pink flowers and dark maroon new growth. They're part of a class of purple teas. If you're into tea, you may or may not have heard of them, but they are enriched with anthocyanins.
Anthocyanins,
and they're thought of as having extra health benefits.
Right, a lot more antioxidants. And
so we featured a couple of teas that we make from some of our plants that are of that background. And then we did white teas blended with rose petals, which also have those anthocyanins in them. Anyway, we have that was like such a fun day.
So basically white tea, green tea, black tea, oolong, pu-ehr, they're all from the same Camellia sinensis.
More or less.
Okay.
There are different varieties, different conditions, other factors, but mostly the biggest difference is how it's processed and the degree of oxidation.
So do you want to maybe go and see some of the leaves? I'd love to see,
let's go look at the plants.
Yeah, maybe what you would typically harvest. And
you know, we sell little bits of tea here on the farm, and then we also do educational workshops for like growers. Like this weekend, we're doing a planting workshop where people can, you know, see how we prepare our beds, how we recommend. I wrote a book, which was meant to help people start from the very beginning, because it turns out it's a little harder than you think to grow tea.
Well, it's also not native to here. So when we talk about people are used to like having their herbal tisanes or whatever you want to call them, because they're not typically tea, right? The official tea is from Camellia sinensis, right? And when we think about teas, we think about our herbal teas. But this is, it's a little different.
But it's
not part of a culture, I guess.
It's not part of a culture. Actually, my co-author is a historian of tea, and we wanted to start out by writing a history of the sort of modern U.S. tea growers movement, which has really taken off over the last 20 years.
Yeah.
But it's been here since colonial times.
Well, if you think about the Tea Party.
Well, the tea itself, there's lots of reasons why economically that we don't have a tea industry, but we can make very, very, oh my God. You want to smell this? Just smell it, okay?
I know, it's delicious.
Do you get the aroma from that?
It's very floral. There's like
floral,
a floral.
And this is a particular plant that's super cold hardy, slow growing, but makes the most astounding aromatic tea, both black and green teas. They're just amazing. So that's why I wanted to share it with you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing, because both Sonder and myself are big tea drinkers.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, and it is one of our most cold tolerant plants. It survived a -9-degree freeze that happened here in North Carolina a few decades ago.
So the surviving meaning like they
It was not
entirely?
killed back to the ground at all.
Okay.
Whereas many other camellias were.
Yeah. So it's hardy.
It's hardy. You know, there are other hardy varieties, and we sell them as well. We have, probably one of the largest collections, if not the largest collection of different camellia
Yeah,
sinensis
when I was
in
talking
the
with
States.
David, I was mentioning, I was like, you're like the closest one to us. I'm like, what else is out there? And he mentioned maybe like one or two more. He's like, there's some in California.
Yeah. But we seem to have this habit. It started, his dad was a professor in the species camellias, and so he would collect all these plants and related plants for tea. We even have one that we use for white tea. You can hardly tell the difference, but it's actually called Camellia tylophila.
So it's a completely different species.
It's close enough to tea that it has many of the same compounds, and instead of caffeine, it favors theobromine, so a different alkaloid, which is found in cocoa, so sometimes it's called cocoa tea.
So does it give you a sense of, a theobromine, I can't remember what it's used, but does it give you a sense of like euphoria a bit?
No, it's what's in chocolate.
Okay, well chocolate doesn't give you euphoria?
L-theanine, well yes, all of it. L-theanine though is the unique amino acid to all forms of tea that really has this relaxing effect that together with the caffeine does make you feel fairly euphoric. And we've remarked on this before when we have tea drinking parties. I fell in love with tea because I knew I would be learning the rest of my life. And it was the culture, the history, the plant, the chemistry of making the tea. So what you can see in the greenhouse, first of all, we have even here alone, dozens of different selections, cultivars, ones that we have chosen ourselves here. Like this one, I made the mistake, I'm not sure why, but when I was in the garden, I was like, oh, it has such beautiful leaves, and it had all these baby tea plants underneath it from the seeds, and I was like, it's the queen mother plant. And then David has cloned it, and now we're learning about it. Whether or not, I think it's not going to be super cold hardy, but you never know.
You never know. It does have really beautiful leaves. They're very shiny.
And so we practice, we're making tea from those plants specifically, comparing it to other plants.
Yeah, so are you obviously people are selecting for flowers in a lot of the Camellia japonicas.
Right.
But you're selecting on taste or
we're
quality,
selecting on all sorts of things. Cold hardiness, vigor, taste. We're getting to know the taste. I'm not a tea expert, but I have become in contact with many tea experts through this because of our open doors and educational policies. We invite them in, and now we have friends of the tea garden who know more than I could possibly ever learn about tea. And I was processing with them one summer a couple years ago, and we had tea from 2 different types of plants. And even at the earliest stages of oxidation, it was like, here, smell this. You can tell it's different from this one. So anyway, we select on all sorts of varieties. This one, for example, it needs a real name, but this is called tetraploid. In our hands, it has other names in other places because it's been distributed throughout the Southeast. But the reason it's tetraploid is it has twice as much genetic material, and it makes really big leaves, and they're really thick. And what I like it for are these big hairy buds in the spring, which once it grows a little bit more, we pluck and make into white tea.
Yeah, so you're really plucking
fabulous.
some of the newer growth.
That is what you pluck.
And you pluck both the stem and the leaves, or just the leaves?
Well, the stem comes along with the leaves.
Got it.
So, you need to leave enough leaf on the plant to grow. We favor the plant and plant health. But, there's a fine pluck, there's a super fine pluck of just the leaf bud before it opens up, the fine pluck with just 1 leaf in the bud, or the standard pluck of 2 leaves in a bud. And then for like black teas and oolongs, you might get a 3rd and 4th leaf. As soon as you pluck them, from a plant science perspective, you'll know that releases a hormone that allows the growth stimulates the growth below.
Yeah, the auxins will continue to make the plant
Not
grow.
to get too nerdy,
Yeah.
but basically we will have, you'll pluck, and then 2 weeks later you'll come back and you'll have two new shoots.
More branching.
And you pluck them.
Yeah.
And
and then all of a sudden, doop. And then you
Right.
pluck that, and it's like, doop. And then it starts to probably get bushy, I would imagine.
Right. And one of our jobs here in the nursery is to prune the youngest plants to help raise them so that they will already become bushy.
That was one of my questions is like,
Yeah.
what's your strategy for like, are you pruning them and how often are you pruning them?
Right. There's
in
a
order-
formation prune that has to happen, and I talk about this in my book, but basically it's very painful to want to cut your baby plant back to 6 or 10 inches.
Yeah.
You know, you've got, they have a tendency to put up one tall shoot and you're like, oh no. Or they might have a couple small shoots.
Because it
and you're
probably
like,
wants to be a tree, right?
it would like to
Yeah.
be a tree, and if you cut it low enough, then you'll give it more room to put out its next set of branches, and then you'll do another formation prune so that by the time it gets to about this height, you've got lots of branches with plucking points.
And whenever you see people picking tea, they're like walking through
Right.
like camellia shrubs essentially
Right.
that are just kind of at perfect
Right.
hand height.
So, you know, and I shouldn't show the examples of where, you know, we have so much to do, sometimes we miss the exact moment, but like these were caught pretty early on, and they put out some nice branches to the side, and you can see how that is going to encourage that side branching. These, on the other hand, maybe didn't get caught quite soon enough, like here.
Right.
And so they're going to start their branching up here, and then if you want that multi-stem branching, you're going to be like up here.
Yeah.
And
And then how many little leaves do you need for a good cup of tea?
well, a good cup of tea. You can have a good small cup of tea with a handful of shoots,
Yeah.
and that's my hand size. So you could have a bigger cup with your hand size, probably. I have short
That's
little
good, 'cause
fingers.
you drink a lot more. too.
Yeah, he likes
Yeah.
big cups.
Proportional.
But what it does show you, it will teach you the value of what's in your cup,
That's
because
right.
it really does take a lot of leaves.
I would
And,
even imagine like when you get matcha, and matcha is relatively expensive, like as
Yeah.
far as tea goes, and they powder it. You know, that's powdered. It's,
Oh my gosh.
You know, so I'd imagine there's so many leaves in that little
Yes.
vessel that you buy.
And we've recently been working on matcha. I did a little experimenting on it for the book, and so I could have good pictures of it. But you know, recently we tried a much larger area, and what you have to do is you have to remove the stems. So even within the leaf, you have to take out the little stems
Oh.
and just get the leaf pieces.
So the central vein.
The central
essentially.
vein
Yeah.
comes out, and all the stems, and then you grind what's left of the leaf.
Wow, that is so laborious, especially because you're using the small leaves.
Yeah. Well, the Japanese have perfected their machinery.
Don't they have like steam? They steam it? or
They,
some-
you
they
steam it. You do a short, quick steam. They're very efficient. They have really wonderful mechanics.
In
but
China, they do something different, right?
Yeah.
Because the Japanese steam,
Right.
Chinese.
right, so there are exceptions. There
Yeah.
are some Japanese roasted teas, and there are some Chinese steamed teas. In
Okay.
fact, the Chinese were steaming their teas when tea migrated along with Buddhism to Japan and Korea. Many of the famous Chinese teas now are roasted, and that adds a whole layer of other flavors to that during the process of the higher heat in a dry pan.
Okay. And black tea is roasted or?
Well, black tea is also roasted after
Right.
it's oxidized.
Okay.
And that roasting, the Maillard reaction, all adds to the layers of flavors that you're expecting in your black tea.
It's so nuanced, and I think when people start to drink tea, it's so funny because like I'm going to tell a little personal story. My dad was always like, tea, it tastes like dirt water. I'm like, you've never had good tea, Dad.
Exactly.
Now he's a tea drinker because you start to taste the different nuance. Obviously, it starts with the leaf or the plant that you're using and the freshness of it and everything that's associated with it. And you could become a really good like tea drinker, and you have the nuance of flavor and
Yeah.
scent.
Yeah.
And I love it. It's almost like being like a wine taster to a certain extent.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that there are professional tea tasters. If you want English breakfast tea from Twinings, you want English breakfast tea from Twinings. And so there are people who know enough and can taste enough to go from all the harvests from around the world, wherever they source it from, and pick up exactly those flavors that they want for that blend. And it might be different from Bigelow
Yeah.
or somebody else's English breakfast tea.
Now,
So-
is there something that's unique about some of the green tea here that's maybe produced here in North Carolina that you could taste that's like slightly different than any other green tea or black tea or white tea that you've tasted? Or not, you're maybe not at that
I think
taste
that's
level.
hard to say. I mean, it's a factor of climate and how fast they're growing and elevation. So, of course, there are unique aspects to all different terroirs. That tea that I made you from the Carolina Emerald, that I would say is fairly unique because it comes from what is likely a heritage Japanese tea strain. So brought over here over 100 years ago to the Arboretum and Collection here at UNC. And it's probably not grown or made into tea anywhere else.
How long can you have a dried tea leaf before it starts to really lose its flavor?
Well, I think you have to keep in mind storage needs to block out the light and as much as possible the air. Light is more important, but it also depends on the tea. You know, aged, I did not think there was a thing such as aged white teas. I'm not sure I appreciate them the way others might, but like a white tea tends to not keep its flavors, at least the ones that I love the most, for more than 6 to 12 months. You know, a green tea also, you know, it can store pretty well, but black teas are the ones, blacks and oolongs have a longer life and short shelf span. There's also a practice of like re-roasting the darker teas to revive or add flavors to them.
I hadn't
All
heard of
sorts
that.
of things to know.
Yeah, all little tricks.
You know, if you're interested in more cold hardy varieties, like we have customers growing Sochi and Korean teas up in like Maryland and up in the Appalachians.
I think until we get our greenhouse, because we're on the border of 5-6, although I haven't checked the USDA grow zone maps.
It doesn't matter anyway,
Yeah.
because what you have to worry about is the microclimate and the extremes. So shade is actually a protectant in the winter, and in cold environments it's really important to have morning shade. So when the sun comes up and it's below freezing, that is a stress on the young tea plants especially are most vulnerable to that kind of stress.
Really good
So,
tips.
Getting
Yeah.
started. You know, I write it, as I said, I write a lot about it. That's just sort of the beginners, but you know, as we've gone through the years in our own garden, we have learned all these lessons over and over again.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this. It just gives us a little tea highlight. And for folks who are most interested in becoming maybe tea connoisseurs, you could check out her book. Who's your co-author's name?
Susan Walcott.
Okay, so
Or come visit.
Or
we
come
have
visit.
people who love to come visit.
workshops.
We love doing our harvest and process workshop just because it sort of introduces people to all the different aspects of going from the leaf to the cup.
Well, thank you so much for like bringing it to folks when you normally in this country you wouldn't normally get a chance to do that, you know, to this
Yeah,
extent. And it's
Yeah.
Partially because you have all these beautiful
Well, this
camellias
is
that are
our
around you.
resource. I think you have to be, you know, from an honest point of view,
Yeah.
it's an economically intensive crop, just like growing fruit trees or something. It takes years before you can get a return on investment. So it's not easy for a farmer. It's easier for a backyard tea gardener if they're, you know, interested in it as a hobby.
Yeah, and especially if you just want your own personal cup.
And then you'll totally appreciate what goes into a cup and
Yeah.
then your taste for fine teas and how much you're willing to spend on them goes up through the roof.
Well, thank you so much.
My
I
pleasure.
really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
A special thanks to our members on this channel. Now, if you want to support, hit the join button to see our additional perks. And don't forget to subscribe too. And stay tuned here because we have more great stories around the bend.